There's a version of you that has already started, already launched the idea, already had the conversation, already made the move. That version didn't wait for certainty, didn't need every variable accounted for, didn't spend 3 weeks researching the right time to begin. That version just went. But you're still here, still thinking, still preparing to prepare. And the longer you stand at that crossroads, the more the thinking starts to feel like progress. It isn't. Overthinking is one of the most sophisticated self-sabotage mechanisms the human mind has ever developed. It disguises itself as intelligence. It masquerades as responsibility. It tells you it's keeping you safe. And the whole time, it's quietly dismantling your potential, piece by piece. Today, we're going to understand exactly how. The illusion of productive thinking. First, let's be precise about what we mean. Overthinking is not the same as deep thinking. It is not careful analysis. It is not thoughtful planning. Overthinking is the process of repeatedly cycling through the same thoughts, without arriving at new conclusions or taking action. It is the mental equivalent of running on a treadmill, enormous energy, zero forward movement. Psychologists call this rumination, a loop of repetitive, often negative thought patterns that the mind returns to again and again, not to solve a problem, but because it has become addicted to the simulation of solving it. And here's what makes it so dangerous. It feels productive. When you're overthinking, your brain is highly active. You're generating scenarios, calculating outcomes, identifying risks. From the inside, it feels like work is being done. But research in cognitive neuroscience tells a different story. Studies show that chronic ruminators don't actually process problems more deeply. They process them more repeatedly. The same surface-level anxiety, dressed up in increasingly elaborate costumes. The output is not better decisions, the output is paralysis. And paralysis in a world that rewards action is its own kind of failure. The mechanisms of quiet destruction. Overthinking doesn't announce itself. It erodes you slowly through 4 specific mechanisms. The first, decision fatigue acceleration. Every decision you make or may need to rehearse making draws from the same finite reservoir of mental energy. Psychologists call this decision fatigue. The overthinker doesn't just make decisions, they make them dozens of times in their head before the actual moment arrives. By the time reality demands a choice, the tank is nearly empty. This is why overthinkers often make impulsive decisions in low-stakes situations. They've burned their cognitive resources rehearsing the high-stakes ones. The mind, exhausted from simulation, defaults to the path of least resistance, not the best path, the easiest one. The second mechanism, opportunity cost blindness. Time spent overthinking is time not spent doing. This seems obvious, but what we fail to account for is that opportunities are not patient. Markets shift. Relationships evolve. The moment that existed for a particular action, to send the message, to make the pitch, to say the thing, has a lifespan. And overthinking has a habit of outlasting it. What compounds this is that the overthinker often doesn't realize what they've missed. They're too busy still deciding whether to walk through a door that is already closed. The third mechanism, confidence erosion. There is a counterintuitive truth about overthinking and self-confidence. The more you think about a decision, the less confident you feel making it. This is because extended deliberation forces you to surface every possible objection, every worst-case outcome, every reason something could go wrong. The longer you look for reasons to doubt yourself, the more you find. The mind is extraordinarily good at generating doubt on demand. Give it enough time, and it will construct a bulletproof case against almost any action. So the overthinker who began with reasonable confidence gradually talks themselves out of it, not because the idea was bad, but because they gave their fears more airtime than their instincts. The fourth and most insidious mechanism, identity calcification. Over time, chronic overthinking becomes more than a habit. It becomes a self-concept. The person who once overthought decisions begins to identify as someone who is careful, measured, risk-averse. They build a personality around their paralysis. They find community with others who do the same, groups that intellectualize inaction and call it wisdom. And once overthinking becomes part of who you are, stopping feels like self-betrayal. That is when potential doesn't just get delayed, it gets replaced with a story about why it was never realistic to begin with. The intelligence trap. Here's something worth sitting with. Overthinking disproportionately affects intelligent, self-aware people. Not because intelligence is a flaw, but because a capable mind, turned inward without direction, becomes its own obstacle. High intelligence means you can generate more scenarios faster. You can identify more risks. You can construct more elaborate justifications for inaction. Self-awareness means you can observe your own hesitation, which sometimes deepens it. You become aware that you're overthinking, which triggers thoughts about why you're overthinking, which triggers thoughts about whether those thoughts are accurate. Philosopher Alan Watts described this as the backwards law. The more you try to control your thinking, the more it controls you. And so the very qualities that should accelerate your potential, your intelligence, your self-reflection, your ability to think in complexity, become the walls of your own mental prison. Not because they are weaknesses, but because they have been turned in the wrong direction, toward protection instead of creation. From thinking to moving. The solution to overthinking is not to think less. It is to redirect the thinking and to understand the fundamental difference between analysis and avoidance. Analysis asks, what information do I need to make this decision? Avoidance asks, what information might change this decision? And then never stops looking. The overthinker is almost always in avoidance mode, dressed in the language of analysis. The tell is simple. If you've been thinking about it for more than 3 days, and you have all the information you had on day 1, you are no longer thinking. You are hiding. The first practice is what psychologists call a decision threshold, a predetermined point at which you commit to acting on the information you have, rather than the information you wish you had. Jeff Bezos calls this the 70% rule. If you have 70% of the information you'd ideally want, make the decision. The cost of waiting for the remaining 30% almost always exceeds the cost of being slightly wrong. The second practice is separating thinking time from action time. Give yourself a defined window, 30 minutes, an hour, to think about a problem. When the window closes, you either act or you consciously choose to revisit it at a specific future time. What you do not do is let the thinking bleed into every unoccupied moment of your day. The third practice, and perhaps the most powerful, is learning to trust imperfect action over perfect inaction. Every person you admire for their results got there not by thinking better than you, but by acting more than you, by tolerating uncertainty as the price of progress, by understanding that clarity, more often than not, comes after the step, not before it. You will not think your way into your potential. You will move your way there. There's a version of you that has already started. That version isn't smarter than you. isn't more prepared, isn't more certain. They just stopped waiting for the thinking to feel finished. Because here is the truth that overthinking never wants you to reach. The thinking never feels finished. Not because you haven't thought enough, but because the mind will always generate one more question if you give it permission to. At some point, you have to withdraw the permission. At some point, you have to decide that the version of you standing still has cost you enough. If this landed somewhere real for you, you already know what it's pointing at. You don't need more time to think about it.